Okay, today I'm going to talk about simplifying radicals as much as possible. Now, what we already did was we looked at radicals, but we didn't look at simplifying them at all. I think I might have done a little bit on one of the videos. So I want to kind of separate this out and just talk about it as much as possible. These are the problems that you should be able to solve by the end, okay? And when I say solve, I just mean simplify. So the first thing is that anytime you have a square root, anything inside can just be the parts multiplied together. So the square root of 16 is the same thing as the square root of 2 times 8, which is the same thing as the square root of 2, the square root of 8. Now obviously that doesn't help me at all, but that's just an example, okay? What you're really trying to find is perfect squares. So I'm going to give you a list of perfect squares right here. Perfect squares are just a number times itself. So 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 3 is 9, 4 times 4 is 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, 100, 121, 144, 169, and you should know up to 20 times 20. 225, 256, 289, 324, 361, 400. So those are perfect squares up to 20. This is 2, 3, 4, etc. all the way up to 20. Okay? So the reason that you want these is because these are the numbers that you're trying to divide out. Obviously, when I have 16, it is a perfect square. So the square root of 16 is just 4. And I'm done. But we're trying to find the highest perfect square that we can. Okay? So let's say that it gives me something like the square root of 162. 162, I'm going to look for the next highest number and see if it divides evenly. 144 is not going to divide evenly. 121 is not. 100 is not. 81 is. So this is the same thing as the square root of 81 times 2, which is the same thing as the square root of 81, the square root of 2. Now I did this because I know the square root of 81. The square root of 81 is 9. So this is the same thing as 9 square roots of 2. And that's what we're trying to do right now. We're just trying to get these radicals as simplified as possible. Okay? So the square root of negative 224. Now I already know that it's going to be negative 1 times 224. But that's not far enough. Now I want to do the 224. Not going to divide evenly. Not going to divide evenly. Not going to divide evenly. No. 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 Yes. So this is going to be the square root of negative 1 times 16 times 14. And I'm just going through it in my head, but if you need to use a calculator or whatever, you can. The more you do this, the better you'll get at seeing them. So this is going to be the square root of negative 1, the square root of 16, the square root of 14. Square root of negative 1 is I, square root of 16 is 4, and the square root of 14 remains. So that's our answer. Hopefully that makes sense. Now this happens sometimes when you're doing a quadratic, and this is the reason that we wanted to look at this, is so that we can simplify the quadratics. So let's say that I have something like this. It gives me the square root of negative 12 divided by 4. Well, I want to simplify this as much as possible. The square root of negative 12 is going to be negative 1 times 12, which is going to be negative 1 times 4 times 3. And this is still over 4. I'm going to break it apart into separate square roots. Whoops. I said 3, I think, but I wrote down 4. Square root of negative 1 is I. Square root of 4 is 2. Square root of 3 I can't do. So I can simplify this right here. 2 divided by 4 is 1/2. So this is going to be I square root of 3 over 2. I'm just going to simplify those guys down. Now one thing that I saw people making a mistake of a lot was trying to divide this right here. This is underneath a square root, which, remember back to our implied parentheses, says that there's a parentheses there. You can't divide out of the parentheses, so you can't do that, okay? we're gonna look at another one. So let's say that I do a quadratic and I get down to this point right here. Well, I want to simplify this as much as possible. So 2 plus or minus the square root. 20 is 4 times 5, which is going to be 2 plus or minus the square root of 4, square root of 5. And actually, the answer to this should be a plus or minus as well. The square root of 4 I can do, it's 2. So this is going to be 2 plus or minus 2 square root of 5. So this is dividing both of these. So this is the same thing as 2 over 2 plus or minus 2 square roots of 5 over 2. If it helps you to think of it that way, you can do that. Or you can just think, I'm going to divide 2 by 2, which is 1. I'm going to divide this by 2 as well, which is 1 square root of 5. So this is our final answer right there. Hopefully that makes sense. Now the very last thing that I'm going to do is when I have a negative. Okay? So let's say that I have something like let's say that I have, well, I'm going to do two of them. 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 252 over negative 3. This is the same thing as 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 1 times 36 times 7 over negative 3, which is the same thing as 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 1, square root of 36, square root of 7 over negative 3, which is going to be 6 plus or minus, this gives me I, this gives me 6, square roots of 7 over negative 3. Now remember, this is 6 plus 6i square root of 7 over negative 3. 6 minus 6i square root of 7 over negative 3. So I'm going to break these apart. 6 divided by negative 3 is negative 2. Positive 6i square root of 7 divided by negative 3 is negative 2i square root of 7. 6 divided by negative 3 is negative 2. Negative 6i square root of 7 divided by negative 3 is plus 2i square root of 7. So if I wanted to rewrite this as a plus or minus, it's still negative 2 plus or minus 2i square root of 7. Which means when you have this plus or minus, that's not going to change. What's going to change is the sign of this guy right here. So 6 divided by negative 3 is negative 2. Plus or minus stays the same. 6 divided by 3 is 2 square root of 7. Oh, 2i square root of 7. So it still gives me the same answer. Because this plus minus, they're just going to switch spots. I don't really need to change that, okay? And the last one I'm going to do is very similar. I'm going to do negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 252 over negative 3. So I'm going to follow the same process. Negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 1, square root of 36, square root of 7 over negative 3. Negative 6 plus or minus 6i square root of 7 over negative 3. The negative divided by the negative is going to give me a positive. Plus or minus doesn't change. This is going to be 2i square root of 7. And that's my final answer. Hopefully that makes sense. We'll work on these in class tomorrow.